Hi, I'm Nick Bolton, the founder of ICCS, and in this Bitesize Knowledge video, we're going to take a look at I2 of the seven-eyed model. So this is continuing our series looking at each of the eyes of the seven-eyed model. Now, I2, what is it? Well, first of all, it's looking at the work that the coach is doing. In other words, how are they conducting the coaching? What specific approaches are they taking? What methodologies, what models, what philosophy, what style, etc., etc. So what is happening from the coach towards the client? That's what we mean by I2. That's a fairly go-to place for a supervisor to start off, particularly newer supervisors who tend to focus on A, the coach in front of them, and B, what the coach is doing. And it's a very valuable place, but it's certainly not the most valuable. And I think it's really important to say that I2 is simply one of 7 equals, and it can be very easy to privilege one or the other. And I2 often gets a look in as the most privileged. What are you doing? How could you do it better? Now, when we look at the 3 functions of supervision, the formative, the normative, and the restorative, the formative, which is how do we help you become more effective as a coach, often we'll look at I2, which is what are you actually doing? So let's take a look at what does it mean to surface what somebody's doing. First of all, what is it we're looking at when we're looking at what somebody's doing? Well, it can be a number of things. Number one, it can be the contract. How has the contract been conducted? How has it been brought about? And what is the content of that contract such that people are the coaches following it with the clients? That could be one thing. It could also be the style of coaching. Are they provocative? Are they very facilitative? Are they supportive? Is it soft? Is it hard? Is it challenging or is it supportive? These sorts of questions can come into the overall tenor, let's say, of the coaching. It can also be the specific approach that are being used. Perhaps somebody's been trained in the art of grow model coaching and they've never really stretched beyond that. A lot of coaches who trained in the early days took a long time to stretch beyond the grow model, which almost became synonymous with coaching. So it could be that you start to look at, well, what's the model and how could that be restricting the quality of the coaching or the effectiveness of the coaching that's taking place? Maybe it's the psychological framework that's been brought to bear. Perhaps that coach is a transactional analysis coach or an existential coach or positive psychology coach or constructivist coach or whatever. So how is that philosophy of that coach impacting the coaching that's taking place? And is it effective? Is it the right thing that the client needs? But then you might also look at the effectiveness of that approach. So in other words, how do we know that that work is achieving the outcomes that it's required? And is there a change needed in the input from the coach, in the style of coaching or the way they're doing it? Is there a stuckness that maybe needs to be improved through a change of approach? Or is that stuckness something else, emotional, systemic, etc., etc.? So I2 is very much looking at the practical side of coaching, the input from the coach to the client. So what are some of the areas we could look at within all of this? Well, number one, I would say, is to what extent is the coach wedded to a particular approach? There's this famous saying in Gestalt therapy, which is, if all you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. And there's a very, possible risk that in coaching, if all you have is a particular approach, particular philosophy, a particular style, everybody has to conform to that in order for you to bang them on the head with your hammer. So there's a real risk that if you don't look at what's been done, you miss a very constricting and constraining aspect of the coaching. So that's one thing. Another thing might be, well, perhaps it's the right approach, but is it being done effectively? Is the work being carried out in such a way that it actually evokes the change that's required? It could be there's nothing wrong with the philosophical approach or the psychological approach that's being used, but maybe it's not being done effectively. Maybe it's been done in a clumsy way or an ineffective way, or perhaps even in what John Heron might call a perverted way. In other words, it's been done to some degree for the benefit of the coach rather than purely for the client. These things can be explored through the lens of I2. Now, one of the interesting things about I2 is that often the supervisor might not know the very models and approaches that the coach is using. A supervisor is not an encyclopedia of every coaching approach, and there's a possibility that a supervisor comes across a coach who's got a particular style or a particular approach to coaching that's really quite unfamiliar to them. As a cognitive-based coach, coming up against somebody who's a somatic-based coach might seem quite unsettling in some ways. But of course, so long as the supervisor can always position themselves at a meta level, looking at the work with the coach rather than being an expert on the work, then there's always room for that discussion. Hey, how is this working? How effective is this? What might you need to shift in it? And here's what I'm noticing as I hear you talking. We don't need to be an expert at the topic in order to be able to facilitate this thinking. So having talked about the idea that coaches have these different styles, these different approaches and philosophies, and they do certain things to or with the client, then the question becomes, to what extent is the client being done to? And looking through the lens of I2 is often a great way to explore the degree to which the intervention, the approach, is dominating the coaching relationship, or not, and hopefully not. But it can be the case that sometimes coaches get so wedded to a particular approach that it starts to dominate and shape the coaching beyond what's needed by the client. So as a supervisor, when we look through I2, we have a rich landscape to explore. I hope this has been a helpful video, just to give you a sense of what I2 is about. And in the next video, we'll talk about the coaching relationship between the coach and the client. Thanks very much. See you on the next video.